The air in the kitchen was thick with the acrid tang of burnt coffee, the pot left simmering too long on the stove. Daniel's fingers tightened around the chipped mug, its warmth a faint anchor against the cold dread pooling in his chest. Across the table, Sarah's eyes flicked to her phone, her thumb scrolling with a practiced indifference that made his stomach churn. It was the third time in 10 minutes she'd checked it, her lips twitching into a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You're quiet tonight," she said, her voice light, almost mocking, as if daring him to name the weight pressing between them. Daniel's gaze lingered on her, searching for the woman he'd married 6 years ago. The one who'd laughed too loudly at his terrible puns, who'd clung to him during late-night storms. Now her auburn hair was pulled into a careless bun, strands escaping like secrets she couldn't bother to keep. He wanted to ask about the late nights at the office, the new perfume that clung to her coat, the way her laughter had grown sharp, like glass. Instead he said, "Just tired. Long day." His voice was steady but his mind screamed, "Who is it, Sarah? Who's worth this?" The suspicion had crept in slowly, like damp rot spreading through the foundation of their home. It started with small things. A missed call she dismissed too quickly, a receipt for a restaurant he'd never been to, tucked in her purse. Daniel had rationalized it all. "She's stressed. Work's been brutal. I'm overthinking." But last week, when he'd reached for her phone to check the time and she'd snatched it away, her eyes wide with something like fear, the doubt had hardened into a blade. He hadn't confronted her. Not yet. He was afraid of what she'd say, afraid of the truth he already felt in his bones. Sarah stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor, the sound jarring in the quiet. "I'm meeting Claire for drinks," she announced, grabbing her jacket. Her tone was casual, but her movements were too quick, too deliberate. Daniel's pulse quickened. Claire, her coworker, had always been her alibi, but he'd called Claire's office 2 days ago. She'd been out of town all week. The lie sat heavy in his throat, but he swallowed it, nodding. "Have fun," he said, the words tasting like ash. As the door clicked shut behind her, Daniel's eyes fell on her laptop, left open on the counter. His heart thudded, a traitor's rhythm. He'd never been the type to snoop. Trust had been their cornerstone, or so he'd thought. But the laptop glowed softly, its screen a siren's call. His fingers hovered over the trackpad, guilt warring with need. Just one look, he told himself. Just to be sure. He opened her email, the cursor trembling as he scrolled through mundane work messages. Then he saw it, a thread buried in her trash folder, from an address he didn't recognize. m.connor87@gmail.com. The subject line was blank. Each email was a punch to the gut. "Missed you last night," one read. "Can't stop thinking about you," said another. The words were intimate, reckless, alive with a passion Sarah hadn't shown him in years. Daniel's breath hitched as he read further, the timestamp stretching back months. How long? He thought, his vision blurring. How long has she been living this other life? The final email, sent just yesterday, was a single line. "Tomorrow, usual place. Don't be late." His hands shook as he closed the laptop, the room spinning. The kitchen, once their sanctuary, felt like a stage set for someone else's life. He didn't sleep that night. The bed was too large, too empty, the sheets cold where Sarah should have been. His mind churned, replaying every moment he'd dismissed, her late nights, her distracted smiles, the way she'd flinched when he'd touched her last week. He wanted to scream, to shatter something, but instead he sat in the dark, his thoughts a tangle of rage and grief. Why wasn't I enough? The question clawed at him, raw and relentless. He loved her. God, he still loved her. But the betrayal was a wound that bled trust with every heartbeat. By morning, Daniel had made a decision. He called their bank, his voice steady as he froze their joint accounts. "Fraud concern," he told the clerk, the lie bitter but necessary. He wasn't ready to confront her, not yet, but he needed control. Something to anchor him as the world crumbled. When Sarah returned that afternoon, her eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed with a glow that wasn't for him. "You look tired," she said. Her tone clipped as she dropped her bag. "Everything okay?" Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to hurl the emails in her face, to demand answers, but the words caught in his throat. Instead he said, "Your card got declined at the bar last night, didn't it?" Her face froze. a flicker of panic crossing her eyes before she masked it with a laugh. Claire covered me, she said too quickly. Glitch at the bank, probably. The lie was flimsy, and Daniel's heart sank further. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. That evening, he followed her. It felt like betrayal, mirroring her deceit, but he needed to see it, to make it real. She drove to a dimly lit cafe on the edge of town, one they'd never visited together. Through the window, he saw her slide into a booth across from a man, tall, broad-shouldered, his smile too familiar. Daniel's chest burned as he watched them lean close, her hand brushing his. The man laughed, and Sarah's face lit up in a way Daniel hadn't seen in years. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, torn between storming in and driving away. He chose neither. Instead, he went home, called a lawyer, and started the paperwork. The divorce forms felt like a death sentence, each signature a cut deeper than the last. When Sarah came home, he was waiting in the living room, the papers on the coffee table. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "What's this?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "You tell me," Daniel said, his voice low, trembling with rage and pain. He slid her laptop toward her, the email thread open. Sarah's face drained of color, her lips parting, but no words came. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with the weight of their shattered life. Then she laughed, a brittle, bitter sound. "I was desperate when I married you," she said, her eyes cold. "You were safe, Daniel. But I needed more." The words were a blade, slicing through the last threads of his hope. He wanted to scream, to beg, to ask why she hadn't fought for them, but pride held him silent. "You'll have nothing," he said instead, his voice steady now. "The accounts are frozen. The lawyer's waiting." Sarah's eyes flashed with anger, then something like fear, but she said nothing, only turned and walked out. Days later, Daniel found a note tucked in her dresser, written in her looping scrawl. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to stop. It was too late." The house was empty, the divorce final. But as he stood in the quiet, the note crumpled in his fist, he realized the betrayal wasn't just hers. He'd betrayed himself, clinging to a love that had died long before he'd admitted it. The truth was a wound, but it was also a release, a twisted, painful freedom.